Hi everybody, great to be with you again today. I just released a long video from my course on Martin Heidegger's contributions to philosophy of the event, Heidegger's second masterpiece, as it has been called in comparison to Being and Time. And it's an hour and 15 minutes long. It's from my course, as I say, which is probably by now 13 or 14 hours. It's at millermanschool.com. But nobody can be assumed to have that much time to go through such a difficult work. So I thought I'd give you a very brief, too long, didn't read version of the video and of the book. Okay, so here we go. Gonna do this on the spot and you're gonna get a lot out of it. What is Contributions to Philosophy of the Event? It's a book about the possibility of another beginning of philosophy. What's another beginning of philosophy? Well, you have the first beginning, that's Greek philosophy with the pre-Socratics, Anaximander, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and that history has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It begins with the pre-Socratics. Its middle, you could say, is in the Middle Ages and then at the onset of modernity with Descartes. And it ends in Nietzsche. And it undergoes these various stages or phases along the way. And Heidegger's view is that that is a coherent whole. It literally is a single episode or phase that has ended. And he characterizes that whole process as the gradual abandonment of us, you could say, by being. Being, which is for him absolutely at the center of all his attention. He said that the question of being is his question. It's the book he writes over and over and over again. He has no choice but to continue to pursue that question. The question, what is being? And what he says is that you can understand the whole first history of philosophy from the point of view of it's no longer attending properly to being. Now, that might seem weird because the history of philosophy does talk about being, but Heidegger's view is that it always talks about a distorted transformation that belongs to the first history of philosophy. And that the genuine thing, the real deal, the being that we're trying to get to that lies at the wellspring or basis of all of its later distorted transformations, receded from sight, receded from attention, pulled itself away, abandoned us, was forgotten by us, concealed itself, and just stayed away. So that's the whole first history of philosophy. Being is thought and then recedes from thought. And what we're left dealing with is a shell of its former self, so to speak, until we get to Nietzsche and the will to power. Nietzsche, ultimately, in Heidegger's view, is an inversion of Plato, who plays an important role at the beginning of philosophy, especially with the interpretation of being as idea. All right, so all of that falls into the first history of philosophy for Heidegger, and he says we can go beyond that, and not go beyond it as a continuation of it, but go beyond it now that it's ended in understanding what it was. In order to do that, we have to think to what was omitted from thought at the beginning, whose omission set the stage for this whole process. So that's his task. Once we see the first history of philosophy as a coherent whole, we trace the various shifts that happened in that time with an eye to the understanding of being. We see that at the very beginning, there was something that wasn't properly considered, namely that it belongs to the nature of being to withdraw itself and not only to be, boom, right there in your face as constant presence. That there's something about being that escaped our view, and we can only see the effect of its having escaped our view as a result of the history that played itself out until Nietzsche. So Heidegger says, let's put all of that into sight. Let's bring all of that into our thoughtfulness, into our thoughtful meditation, thoughtful consideration. And in doing so, we put ourselves back at the wellspring, back at the source, back at the origin, back at the ground or foundation. Not in a way that reproduces the first beginning, but in a way that, building off of the interplay, as he calls it, between the first beginning and this other beginning, sets the stage for a new inauguration of philosophy. Okay, this is supposed to be a too long didn't read version. In other words, it's supposed to be a short version of this book, and I fear that it's already too long too difficult to abstract. So let's try to simplify it again. First history of philosophy, another beginning. The other beginning arises out of a reflection on what happened in the first one and sets out something new. So a crucial idea in the book, I mean, I think it's very powerful, and Heidegger thought so, and there's something we could probably learn from him about that, is that many key oppositions that we use to structure our thinking are only apparent oppositions because they still share the premises of the first history of philosophy. So for Heidegger, the dividing line, the key decision, is between the first history of philosophy and another beginning of philosophy, metaphysics and conceptual thinking. That's the dividing line. However, within metaphysics, there's also a dividing line and a series of oppositions: individual, community, rational, irrational, religious, not religious, monotheist, atheist, or polytheist, or pantheist, A and not a series of divisions that are within metaphysics. So they're not nothing, there's still something. Like, for example, let me just take a very trivial made-up example, okay? Starving or full. Okay, it's not like that's irrelevant, whether I'm starving or full, okay? Absolutely impoverished or absolutely wealthy. It's not like that's totally irrelevant, okay? The distinctions within metaphysics, to go beyond those silly examples, they still matter. So, for example, liberalism and communism, that's not absolutely irrelevant. That's a meaningful difference in some sense, let's say. And yet, for Heidegger, metaphysically, they are the same. Americanism, Bolshevism, metaphysically they are the same because when it comes to their understanding of being, they still fall within the first history of philosophy. So Heidegger once infamously said that the Second World War, quote, decided nothing, unquote, and, said about America and the Soviet Union that they're metaphysically the same. And that's the sense in which you need to understand it. To decide nothing means to decide nothing in the real crucial distinction between metaphysics and another beginning. So that's what this book here is all about. Section number 1 is called The Prospect, and it's about the prospect of another beginning of philosophy. Section number 2 is the resonating, and what resonates in the resonating is the abandonment by being. That's what we begin to attend to. We begin to get present to. That something has stayed away, that something has become distorted, that there's been some series of transformations. What resonates in the resonating is the abandonment by being. That being has fled the scene. The next section is called the interplay. The interplay means the interplay between the first beginning and the other beginning. It's where we start to consider all of philosophy heretofore as a single coherent phase or episode, as he calls it. That's the interplay. A quick way of getting access to what he means by that: in Plato's allegory of the cave, the prisoners in the cave see shadows on the wall, but they do not see them as shadows. They see them as reality. And it's only when they gain some distance that they can go back and see them as shadows. So for the interplay to be happening in Heidegger's thinking, we have to see the first beginning of philosophy as the first, as something distinct from something else that we're thinking. So it implies that we've already made some distance. You see? If you're just stuck in it, you don't see it as first. In order to see it as first, you have to already have moved away from it. And the moving away from it, he calls the leap. The leap leaps away from metaphysics into conceptual thinking, into the question of the truth of being. Now, Heidegger's view was that typically in the first history of philosophy, being had always been thought of in relationship to beings, as that which is most common to them, as that which is their essence, as that which explains them. Being, in metaphysics, was always thought in relationship to beings. But in conceptual thinking, you raise the question of the truth of being, not on the back of beings, not to explain beings, not as a generalization of beings. You leap into the question of the truth of being. And in doing so, you are already separate from metaphysics. Okay, so what I'm telling you is the sections of this book. The prospect of another beginning of thinking, the resonating of the abandonment by being, the interplay of the first and the other beginning. And then in the 75-minute video I put out earlier today, you have, sorry, I missed something, right? The resonating. Oh yeah, the prospect, the resonating, the interplay, and the leap. That's right, the prospect, the resonating, interplay, and the leap. And then in the last three sections of the book, you have the grounding, the future ones, and the last God. Grounding, future ones, last God. That was the topic of the video today. So grounding means you leapt into the question of the truth of being and you stayed there. You, as it were, brought the lightning upon yourself and let yourself burn. If you don't mind the drastic and dramatic metaphor. Grounding means having leapt into the question, being steadfast there, and grounding the event of the truth of being in and as Dasein. Dasein is the name for who you are once you've leapt into conceptual thinking. Okay, so again, it's not easy. It's abstract. It may seem so. And nevertheless, I thought I'd give you a shorter version just so that you have something to work with. Once you have the grounding, you can ask the question, who does the grounding? Who are the ones who ground the truth of being? Who are the ones who inaugurate this new history of philosophy? Who are the ones who get us beyond metaphysics? Who are they? Heidegger says they are the future ones. That's his name. And there are ranks of the future ones. Here's the easiest way to understand that. Imagine you're the first person to have gone and explored unexplored territory. And you set up the camp and you begin to clear the area. And then come the first pioneers who build the infrastructure. And finally, there come all of the people who will make that their home. At least three levels: the single ones, the few, and the many. And Heidegger considers them, I mean, they're familiar to us from other considerations in the history of political thought, political theory, and political philosophy, but Heidegger transposes that into the realm of another beginning of philosophy. You're going to have the pioneers who ground the space as Dasein of the truth of being, and then these other groups of future ones. And one of the things he says that's worth thinking about is that, you'll see it in the video, but he thinks peoples in this light. So the many who come to live, let's say, in the land that's been cleared by the enterprising philosopher or poet, constitute a people. It's not a racial people. It's not a biological people. It's not a liberal agglomeration of individuals. It is a people understood on the basis of their relationship to the truth of being. It's not easy, but that's what Heidegger has to offer us. In his view, this way of thinking is going to, as it were, we're going to live into the future of Heidegger's thought over the next, let's say, several thousands of years, just as over the last several thousands of years, we've lived into the future of Plato's thought. That means, like, if you ever heard the phrase, philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato, Plato gave us the matrix within which philosophy developed, even in its anti-Platonic forms. Heidegger, we could say, with his conceptual thinking, gives us the matrix in which the next history of philosophy will develop. Not as a continuation of what came before, but as something decisively other. That's the future ones, the grounding, the future ones. And finally, the last God. The last God is an obscure topic, but also an amazing topic. It's in my view, the most interesting part of the last video I put out. It comes towards the end. And here, I'll just say the following. Heidegger sometimes talks about the last God, sometimes about the gods, sometimes about the God of a people. And so you raise the question, what does all of this mean? Who is the God? Is there one? Are there many? And what does it mean to be the last? And the most insightful, depending on how you look at it, maybe for you it's infuriating, maybe for you it's just obscurantist, but in my view, the most interesting and exciting and insightful thought that Heidegger has to offer on that is that it's a mistake to try to number the realm of the godly, to count on, or to reckon with the realm of the godly. So what we have then are questions that open us up to the realm of the God, the gods, and the last God, but without quantification. Okay, that's the too long didn't read of this incredible book, Heidegger's second masterpiece, Contributions to Philosophy of the Event. I have a couple of free videos on that on my channel, as well as a course with about, at the moment, 12, 13, 14, 15 or so hours of commentary at millermanschool.com. Check it out. Have a great day. Goodbye.